Werewolf versus Grizzly. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was a kid and my grandpa found out he didn't have long to live, he asked us all to help him go camping one final time. He had a specific place in mind, which is a place that he once saw a werewolf battling a grizzly bear. He didn't just see it happen once either, because Grandpa used to live in those woods, and the grizzly was a constant pest. The werewolf? The werewolf was no pest. In fact, the werewolf was their friend and protector. Without him, my grandpa wouldn't have lived long enough for any of the rest of us to even get born. So I guess the werewolf was my friend, too. When I say werewolf, I assume that I'm really saying dogman in the modern sense of the words. I could be wrong, though. I don't remember any stories of the dogman becoming human in any of Grandpa's tales. So I think he was describing a kind of intelligent animal that lived over there when Grandpa was young. Again, I never quizzed Grandpa about that part of these stories while he was alive, so I don't really know. Maybe the werewolf was a nature spirit. Maybe he was a shaman or brujo or skinwalker. I didn't know any of those words back in the 70s when we took that camping trip to Montana though anyway, so I don't suppose it matters. That's right, I said Montana. The location Grandpa used to live in was just a slight bit north of the Kootenai National Forest, which is up north in Montana near Canada. I haven't heard of other dogman stories from Montana, but I have heard of them from Canada, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised if some of them crossed the border, or at least used to when my grandpa was young. And when was that? Let's see. If this story happened in 1972, our camping trip I mean, and Grandpa was dealing with grizzlies and dogmen 45 years earlier when he was a teen, I don't really know when the dogman parts happened. I'm bad at math since the battery's corroded in my old Texas Instruments handheld calculator. No, seriously, Grandpa claimed the dogman hung around his family in the late 30s, up until when he got drafted to go fight overseas in the early 40s. His family dispersed during and after World War II, and apparently the dogman didn't have Facebook, because they all lost touch after that. I mean, the family lost touch with the dogman, not with each other. This is coming out sounding senile, so maybe I better have some AI rewrite it for me. Well, I don't remember exactly where we camped in these vast woods, but I remember Grandpa directed my dad to first stop at the rock jump, which is just that, a rock for kids to jump off of into the water. We three kids had a blast and Grandpa laughed a lot watching us play and splash around. I got the sense that we were playing for him, as well as for ourselves. From there we hiked into the woods to be near where Grandpa's house was when he was a kid. He claimed we were at the spot, but we couldn't find any sign that there had ever been a house there anyplace. I had really wanted to see a real log cabin since Abraham Lincoln was supposed to have grown up in one as well. I was a big fan of Lincoln. He freed the slaves and all that. Don't know if you're allowed to talk about him on YouTube in an election year though. So I didn't get to see a log cabin that weekend and I didn't get to see any dogman either. But there was a bear reportedly in the area according to a ranger who came by to warn us and list out the safety protocols that existed in those days. We did not get to see the bear, and I suppose for that I should be grateful. Bears were still bears back in those days. I don't think that it was a grizzly that was in the area, but it was a bear. Do grizzlies still come down into the USA at all? I'm sorry, I don't even know. But back in the 30s, apparently they still did at least. If anyone from Montana has ever seen or heard of grizzlies still coming by over there, please educate us in the comments. My sister and brother and I did get to hear Grandpa's stories about a real-life werewolf that for some reason looked out for him and his family when he was young. We were looked at in the eye, and we were told that it was our duty to the family to remember these stories too. Soon Grandpa wouldn't be able to tell them anymore, and we would all need to tell them for him. Since I have no more family to pass these tales on to, I suppose it's your choice now to remember them and pass them on, or to allow them to fade away with me and my family. The first story was also the first time Grandpa had seen either a bear or a werewolf. I'm going to use that word or Dogman interchangeably since we can't get a DNA sample from these stories to really know what the creature was. Grandpa was walking back from town carrying a big sack of white flour that was too heavy for someone his age, whatever that age was. Grandpa had to keep taking a break and putting the big cloth bag down on the ground. He was covered in flour dust and was leaving a white trail behind him on the gravel road through the woods, leading to the family home. One time when Grandpa put the bag down and sat on it to catch his breath, he caught sight of a very large bear coming up behind him. Adrenaline and fear gave him a second wind, and Grandpa somehow threw the bag on his back and ran away, he told us, quote, like Groucho Marx, unquote. Now I knew Groucho Marx was an old comedian, but I didn't understand what that reference meant. So my mother told us that Groucho was famous in his time for his funny walk when he would be bent over forward as though he was carrying something heavy on his back. Okay, anyway. Grandpa kept trying to stay ahead of the bear, but he was growing exhausted and starting to feel like he couldn't get enough oxygen in his lungs. He was going to faint, and then the bear would eat both him and the bag of flour. But that was when this dogman or werewolf burst out of the bushes, walking like a man. Or as Grandpa said, he burst out like Superman or Robin Hood. That first encounter he witnessed between the dogman and the grizzly did not lead to violence, but it was an extended standoff. Grandpa had no choice but to sit and watch what was happening as he gasped air into his lungs. He told us it was fate, because this allowed him to study these creatures for an uninterrupted period. He told us it was 5 or 10 minutes, but even if it was 30 seconds that felt like 10 minutes, it must have been mind-blowing to have such a ringside seat, even if the seat was covered in white flour. Grandpa said that the werewolf gave him a kindly look, and then turned toward the grizzly. That's when it dropped to all fours and began slowly taking one little step at a time toward that bear. The dogman bared his teeth and growled a sound that was unpleasant to hear. The bear at first stood up on its hind legs, but then looked confused about the dogman's continued advancing toward him. Then the bear just sort of walked away, and Grandpa said he did too. Although he received no reward for saving young Grandpa from the grizzly, the dogman also intervened to halt the robbery of my great-grandparents one night when they were walking back from a show in town. That was when the family started leaving the werewolf a percentage of whatever meat they could afford in those days. Just before World War II, there was not much meat going around, but the family gave what they could spare to the creature. Everybody wanted him around, as it was a dangerous time. Grandpa says that dogman was not treated as a family pet, however. He was treated as a visiting dignitary. Now this is one of the places where I wished I had quizzed Grandpa more about some of his wording. Why would his family treat an animal like a dignitary? Did they know something about this werewolf that we don't? Was it actually a werewolf? I mean, did it spend some of its life in human form? Or as some other kind of intelligent life form? Again, I'm asking the same questions. Was it a loup-garou from up in Canada? Those are presumed by some to be supernatural entities, and by others to be sorcerers. Of course, in some interpretations and traditions, some sorcerers are supernatural entities, a race separate from human beings. But Grandpa never spoke about the werewolf becoming anything else. I've heard stories people tell about seeing Bigfoot become luminous balls of color, floating through the forest, but still making the sounds of heavy breathing and footfall. Are the werewolves and dogmen also capable of making these kinds of transformations? Did Grandpa's family either know or guess at any of that? Or did they just call the creature a werewolf because it was intelligent and could walk upright on its hind legs? So once the grizzly had smelled the flour, or maybe once he smelled Grandpa, the family found that he haunted their property from then on. And so did the dogman, but for that they were grateful. Now that I think back on the legends, the Dogman saved the bear as often as he saved humans. Grandpa said his father got out a rifle, aiming to put a stop to that bear being so annoying on more than one occasion. But the threat of the grizzly was always dealt with by Officer Dogman, who seemed to be there to keep the peace. The werewolf in Grandpa's stories was never really the bad guy, even though he was apparently very scary and very impressive. One time he scared off an entire pack of wolves by himself, and all he did was growl and posture. But I think my favorite story, and Grandpa took us to the spot where it happened, was the time when the Dogman saved my grandpa's life directly. There's this big tree in those woods that has crazy snake-like roots that go in and out of the earth, like the Loch Ness Monster. It was in one of those loops sticking up out of the ground that Grandpa got his foot stuck one evening when he was coming home later than usual because he had been held back in detention at school. It was getting dark and it was getting cold, and his foot was not coming out as easily as it went in to this loop of thick hard wood. He started working at the root with his pocket knife, but he was going to be at it for hours. And then once he was free, would he even be able to walk on that injured ankle? But that was when the Dogman appeared, with a very serious look in his glowing inhuman eyes. The Dogman made no sound as he observed Grandpa, and Grandpa didn't know what was going to happen next. It was off-putting. That the Dogman was not acting friendly. Was he considering eating Grandpa for dinner that night? Why was he being so serious and so quiet? The big, muscular, furry creature leaped forward toward Grandpa's ankle, and he screamed and covered his eyes, expecting the worst. Something very painful was happening to his ankle, and Grandpa screamed some more, before looking down to see that the Dogman had freed his damaged and sore foot from the root. It was only hurting because his ankle was so banged up. Then the werewolf dropped down on all fours, and Grandpa was able to ride him home, or ride lying down on his back, as the creature brought him home. This was the only time any of the family rode the werewolf, Grandpa told us. This was the only time he offered a ride. I remember that detail because I was saying that I would ride the werewolf to the store, and ride the werewolf to the movies or whatever. So Grandpa made it clear that the werewolf was not like a bus or the subway. This was the one time in which he rescued Grandpa in that way. It didn't mean he ran routes 3 times an hour, but that's the way kids think. Or at least that's the way I used to think when I was a kid. There was one of the stories that really made me wonder if this was a man or some other higher life form. It involved Grandpa's mother walking home from the butcher with a bag full of meat. Then she noticed that she was being followed and surrounded by a pack of wild, yipping, dancing coyotes. My great-grandmother thought she had seen her last day, and that she was going to end up like the meat in her arms. Then the werewolf emerged from hiding and escorted her the rest of the way home. He didn't even bother growling at the coyotes. He merely walked between my great-grandmother and the canines, and they wisely kept their distance. When they reached the door to the house, great-grandmother reached into the bag and tore off some meat to give to the Dogman in order to thank him for his security guard door-to-door service. The werewolf took the meat from her respectfully and thankfully, then retreated from her presence. When he thought she wasn't looking, though, he tossed the meat to the coyotes, who tore it to ribbons in seconds. What kind of an animal would do that? Only a human would do that. Or, like I said, some other higher life form. Higher than us, most likely. After telling us a bunch of stories, Grandpa seemed very relieved. Not only because he had passed the stories on, but because we didn't laugh at him or the old tales he was telling. In fact, my older brother, who was 15, went searching around one morning, looking for evidence that the creature might still be living in the area. He discovered something that made him very excited, and he ran back to camp whooping it up. It turned out that my brother had found a cave nearby, and when he led us all to it, you could have knocked Grandpa over with a feather. He said this cave would have been less than 100 yards from his old house's back door, yet he never remembered laying eyes on it before. He said it was impossible that it could be there, But my father pointed out tree stumps and suggested that it must have been overgrown and covered over during Grandpa's childhood. He could have walked past it every day and not noticed it when all those trees were still alive. My older brother and my dad and my grandfather walked into the cave, leaving me and the females outside, to wait nervously for them to come back out. I was scared I would hear them screaming, or hear a wolf howling, one or the other. But our three relatives emerged safely, telling a pretty interesting tale that might be a good one to wrap this all up with. My teenage brother, being the youngest and most eager, led the guys on their way in. There was a tunnel that they had to bend down to fit through for a while, but other than that they were able to walk standing up, through narrow tunnels that appeared to have been formed naturally. As they approached what looked like a larger chamber ahead, a gust of hot, rancid air hit them in the face, causing them to feel nauseous, and to immediately begin retreating. They were rotting things no longer alive deeper in that cave, indicating that it might be a kill cave for a predator. It might also be a place animals go to die, and in either case, the three men beat it back to us women and children as fast as their scared little manly feet could manage. Everyone started to walk back to camp, but I was like, wait a second. So you're saying this might be the Dogman's cave? I was answered in the affirmative. It might be the Dogman's cave. I asked if we were going to alert the newspapers, which used to report news in those days. I asked if we were going to tell Mr. Spock about it, or were we going to go on television and raise money for an expedition to explore the cave, you know? Like in that movie we had all seen on Chiller Theater. My brother, the two men, and Mom all laughed. When they laughed at me, I wanted to know why. I was told that while it might be the werewolf's home, it might also be the cave of a cougar, or a bear, or a family of wolves. That cave might very well house man-eating animals, I was told. Animals that would love to make a meal of a boy my age. Well, that shut me up. Just as I suppose I should shut up now and ask Bigfoot to please tell us about this week's executive producer. What say, Biggie? He's as cool as a boa constrictor. I'm talking about our new EP, Victor. Please join me in thanking and welcoming our newest executive producer, Victor Lopez, who just became our latest top-tier PayPal Club member over at peterbernard.com. That means Victor gets to see our secret uncensored Dogman and Werewolf stories, of which we are dropping 2, one later tonight and one tomorrow, and of which we do 4 per month. Victor also gets to see our over 25 hours of archived secret uncensored stories, stretching back to I think 2017 or 2018, something like that. Thank you, Victor. We hope you're enjoying all the hours and hours of secret shows, and we want you to know your donation was spent on bagels and butter. Literally. I also want to thank the rest of you who've been donating so much lately. I'm really very grateful. I have to get caught up on thanking everyone with executive producer credits, including another one for Kathy Barrickman. John Carnagon's been donating too. A lot of people. I'll get to everyone, and I'll thank everyone as soon as I can. If you would like to be thanked on our show and get to see our secret uncensored members-only stories, then listen to what our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman, has to say. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.